I don't own Lufia 2, and I'm salty that I don't, because I almost did, and I had a full intention to buy a cartridge of Lufia 2. But what ended up happening was, about a year ago, I moved halfway across the country from Florida to Texas. I have since moved back, but that's neither here nor there. And the closest retro video game store to me in Florida had this Lufia 2 cartridge on sale for like a year and a half. The entire time that I lived near this store, they had this Lufia 2 cartridge on sale for an ungodly price. It was like $180 or something. It was some ridiculous bonk-a-hogs number that was overpriced even for that game, and that game's expensive as fuck, so that says a lot. And when on my way out of town, when I was moving, U-Haul in tow, I had all my shit in the back. I figured my last interaction at this game store was going to be me going in and buying this Lufia 2 that has been there for over a year. But I've been eyeballing it for so long, and I guess this is my last chance to get it, so yeah, I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna buy his copy of Lufia 2. And, well, I mean, if it's still there, I'm assuming it is. It's been there for months. So I had all my money. I had two crisp $100 bills ready to just walk up, plomp them down on the table, and say, I'm taking that Lufia 2. So I did that. I walked up and I'm like, today's the day. You're selling that Lufia 2. Only I look into the case. It's not there. The guy tells me, I don't know. It's gone. He said somebody bought it 2 days ago. 2 days ago. I missed it by 2 days. It was there for months. He said it was there for a year. What can I say? And it's just the way it shakes out. Somebody came in and bought that Lufia 2 before I was able to. So to this day, I forgot to bring it, but I own Lufia 1. Oh, fuck it. I'll put it in right here. It's right here. I own Lufia 1. It's right here. But I don't own Lufia 2. And I'm mad about that. Lufia 2 starts with this 8-minute and 40-second long cutscene to set the stage. It's hard to follow your first time through because you're not given any context as to what the hell is going on. What are Sinistrals? What's the dual blade? Who are these people? It's all inner character dialogue, and there's as much of it here as there is the rest of the game combined, it feels like. This was all pretty meaningless to me because I had never played the game before, and I had no idea who any of these people were, but watching it back now, these character exchanges, they're kinda cool. They're planting seeds, even if the player isn't likely to remember them. These are all of our eventual party members, some of whom we won't see again for another 30 hours. I like it more than Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War's long-ass intro cutscene anyway. Having characters living out a little bit of their day-to-day lives before the game starts is a much more natural way to introduce these characters than plainly in third person telling me who they are or why such and such country is at war. Right away though, you can tell that we're dealing with some English. Both Lufia games were like that. The two contain what are supposed to be heartwarming romantic moments, but neither have the linguistic chops to pull them off, and it always comes off as more awkward than anything else. It's Breath of Fire 2 syndrome. Incredibly simple English. These games read like a novel you could have been asked to read aloud as a class in 2nd grade. In this case, and this is also true of the original Lufia, I don't believe we're missing out on that much, because the plot isn't worth writing to home about. There are 4 super beings called the Sinistrals, and they're pretty much unambiguously evil. 3 of them anyway. One of them is a double agent, it turns out, working for you. They destroy towns, kidnap women, generally terrorize the planet. In the end, you kill them. GG-EZ. If you played the original Lufia, you already knew that because the intro of that game is actually the ending to this one. The exact same scene, they replayed it out. So it's almost not a spoiler, but still is, so hit L on the keyboard if you want to skip ahead 10 seconds and you don't want to hear it. Our main characters die in the end. It also has one of the strangest weddings in video game history. So much so that I thought I messed up and got paired with the wrong party member. That it was like the Final Fantasy VII date scene, and I got paired with Barrett. But no, that's just how the game is. You don't end up with the childhood friend character, you end up with the girl who joins later, and feels like she's only there for a couple dungeons before you get married. You even end up having a kid with her, that you never see again after leaving your house. Dragon Quest V, this is not. he does grow into the protagonist from the original Lufia, so that's pretty cool. In a way, we see him again in that game. In my notes, now I didn't plan this. I swear to God I didn't plan this. I didn't remember that in the original video I said, to describe Lufia 1, that it was the kind of game that went in one ear and out the other. It's such a forgettable, in one ear, out the other experience. I wrote the exact same thing without even remembering what I said in the first video, without rewatching it, without anything. I wrote the exact same thing about Lufia 2. Again, it's not bad, it's just, why play this when you could play anything else? Now, my biggest complaint with Lufia 1 is that it felt too much like a generic cookie-cutter RPG, that it didn't really do much to set itself apart from the rest of the pack on the Super Nintendo. And Lufia 2, now after having finished it, I don't feel like distinguishes itself much more than the original. No, don't get me wrong. 2 is a much better game, and it blows Lufia out of the water in many other ways. It's easier for one, so I guess that's a plus. Lufia is surprisingly difficult. I wiped on more than a few occasions. Late game encounters have instant death spells, bosses hit like tanks, you can't buy revives, so until one of your characters learns the spell, you're SOL. But in terms of character and story, neither Lufia game did much of anything for me. Lufia 2's appeal is much more in its design. It feels weird to talk about level design on a JRPG, but it's important sometimes, and these two games are a perfect case study as to why. The original was made up of basic mazes filled with random battles, huge empty dungeons, empty world map with not much thought put into them. 2, if anything, goes too far in the opposite direction. If anything, it over-designs its dungeons, and they overthought how these things were laid out, that the world map is too minimized. Your walking speed is incredibly fast, and there are no random battles whatsoever when you're inside of a dungeon. You can see all the sprites ahead of time, kind of like an Earthbound. But unlike an Earthbound, you can actually avoid pretty much any fight you don't feel like doing. Random encounters are only on the world map, and the world map is barely a factor in this game. It's so small and pared down to only its most basic elements. They streamlined the fuck out of Lufia 2. You spend almost no time traveling from one destination to another. Oh, you say there's a super secret hidden temple in the mountains north of town? Where legends state that there's a super powerful sword with the unique power to smite the evil Sinistrals. Holy shit, it must be hidden far away from any civilization. Who knows, it might take days, or weeks, or even months. What was that, 15 steps? The game wants you to get where you're going fast. There is almost no filler whatsoever. Lufia 2 also sticks to one of the most rigid formulas I have ever seen. Normally there's at least some smoke and mirrors attempting to hide what you're supposed to do, but not here. The world map is neatly divided into different areas, different self-contained little zones, each one containing exactly one town, one dungeon, and one portal leading to the next area. You can't go through the portal until you clear the dungeon, and most of the time you can't go into the dungeon until you trigger something in town. At least it's always obvious where you're supposed to go, because normally it'll be the only new place you're allowed into. Lufia 2 copy and pastes this formula all the way up until you get the boat around 2/3 of the way through the game, where now you can choose to go to a couple optional areas, such as the casino, but as far as progression, it's the exact same as it has been up to this point. Except after you get the boat, sometimes you can go to a few towns, but it's still only one dungeon accessible at a time. It's the quintessential prime example of what I like to call an Odyssey RPG, where you help each town with their problems before moving on to the next one, before moving on to the next one, before moving on to the next one, till the game runs out of towns. This is all incredibly transparent. You always know what's going on, you always know where to go next, and if you go through one or two of these cycles, you can pretty much determine if you like the rest of the game or not, because nothing ever really gets shaken up. You're still doing the same basic motions in the final area as you are in the intro. It moves at a blisteringly fast pace though. I already mentioned that your run speed is insane, but it goes deeper than that. Lufia 2 is like a box of those little party-sized mini bags of chips. It's paced in such a way that you'll go through a complete cycle in around 30 to 45 minutes. It's great to play in short sittings like that because the game moves so fast. You'll always be accomplishing something. Lufia 2 makes you feel like you're accomplishing so much in such a short amount of time. I crawled through this game, basically only doing one town per day, and then spending the rest of my video game time playing the new Zelda. Because after about a half hour, it seemed like it always came to a natural stopping point. All the loose ends in one town were tied up, and that just kind of killed my motivation to play. Like, I gotta start a whole other cycle, or I could go do something else, and since Zelda just came out, I chose do something else most of the time. You can play it one-handed too, Lufia, not Zelda, because L doubles as our A button, and they perform the same actions. The way events unfold, as a whole, remind me a lot of Final Fantasy IV, or 2 if you prefer. It is the same comic book-esque, cliffhanger, continuous hook, car crash, melodramatic storytelling. Characters die, except not really, unless it's the ending, I guess. Most of the story moments happen at the end of a dungeon, to act as a climax to the whole cycle you've just gone through. You go through a dungeon, get a little story, most of which doesn't end up affecting where the story will eventually end up. It feels like you're spinning tires for most of the game until at the very end, you actually accomplish what you set out to do. At least the end game is set up much better in Lufia 2 than it was in Final Fantasy IV. It doesn't come out of nowhere, it just feels like you do a bunch of pointless bullshit before you get there. Oh, and I haven't even talked about the dungeons. And that's Lufia 2's strongest element by far. They're much closer to Zelda than what you'd expect from a typical JRPG. They actually remind me the most of Brainlord if you've ever played that. But where that game had, what, 5 or maybe 6 dungeons? Lufia has way too many to count. Actually, doesn't have that many. Doesn't have too many to count. Let me count them. 25. See, I can count to 25. But these aren't little 1 to 2 room speed bumps. They're all stuffed with puzzles and thoughtful design. Each one of these 25 dungeons feels almost as artfully crafted as a dungeon from A Link to the Past. You gain items which help you solve said puzzles, which are admittedly nowhere near as inventive as A Link to the Past's items, but they make so much out of what little you get. There's a grappling hook, a swinging ball and hammer, a bow and arrow, a flaming bow and arrow, and bombs. None of which are revolutionary, but the amount of mileage they get out of these items is mind-boggling. Here's a super early example, which doesn't involve any items, but it's the kind of puzzle you can expect from Lufia 2 throughout the whole game. This is taken from the first hour, so it's nothing too complex. There's a switch in this room that you can't activate by stepping on it, but you go up these stairs and notice the crumbly, unstable floor down here. Stepping on one of these tiles causes you to fall down to the floor below. You're supposed to line up the hole with the switch, so you land on it and it'll activate. You can enter the room with the holes from either the top or the right, meaning you can't accidentally solve the puzzle by carelessly running into one of these tiles, because they made sure the correct spot to stand in was out of the way enough that you had to purposefully seek them out. It's cool. This was the first puzzle I came across that I didn't solve right away, that I had to walk around the dungeon for a little bit before I actually figured it out. And the game has a lot of moments like that. They get better and more complex, and again, this was a super early and basic example, but the whole game is littered with little moments like this, which make you feel smart to figure them out. There aren't any that are so obtuse where you absolutely need to look them up either. It's a tricky thing to manage, making your puzzles complex enough to make a player feel smart, but not esoteric enough as to where they can't figure them out. Lufia 2 manages this better than almost any non-Zelda game I've ever played. I could make an 8-hour-long video breaking down every puzzle if I really wanted to, but I won't say much more than that they're well made. So here's the overall wrap on Lufia 2. Do you want to play a well-made, but generic and formulaic JRPG with pretty good, but maybe not up to the Zelda standard of quality for puzzles? A bunch of shit happens, but it mostly went in one ear and out the other. Even immediately after finishing the game, I couldn't tell you what the point of most of the adventuring you do was. Is this one of the best RPGs on the Super Nintendo, like some people suggest? Probably not. I'm going to put it in my good tier. If you're specifically into Super Nintendo RPGs, I'd say go ahead and give Lufia 2 a try. But if you're just a general retro gamer, or someone who has been told that Lufia 2 is one of the greatest RPGs of all time, and otherwise don't play many old video games, then I'd say for those camps it's skippable. As in, Lufia 2 doesn't rise to the level where you should go out of your way to play it or anything. But if you do decide to play it, then you'll probably have a decent enough time. Anyway, that's all I got. Shout out to the patrons. Shout out to William Robert Lee. Harvest Moon will be the next episode. I do feel bad that I've now played through 3 of the most beloved Super Nintendo RPGs in a row, and all 3 were varying degrees of not my thing. And I'm pessimistic about Harvest Moon too. No part of me wants anything to do with that game. But you know me, I'll give it a chance. Maybe it'll end up growing on me. It should be something different at least. Remember, never trust anyone who needs a haircut. Goodbye.